Discussion, avoiding pitfalls and seized opportunities of software-defined vehicles, presented by Invorso.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining us in person or virtually. Really appreciate your time here. So start off with maybe some brief introductions. I'm Brian Rhodes. I'm a director of connected car and vehicle experience at S&P Global. Talking a lot of things in and around SDV, and joined here by Scott Tobin. If you want to introduce yourself, Invorso, and kind of how you relate to the topic we have here today.
Okay. Hi, I'm Scott Tobin. I'm the CEO of Invorso. And Invorso, the genesis of Invorso was really this whole growth of all products becoming more software defined. And back in 2017, our founder really decided that companies that make hardware products traditionally are going to need help on this software journey. So basically, he put a team together of industrial experts and tech company experts, and we bring the best of both worlds together and help clients.
Perfect. Yeah, sounds great. So I think best place to start is just 1 week ago. We had CES 2025. My voice just came back. We were talking this morning. My voice returned from Vegas, a few days behind me. And we saw a ton of announcements around SDV. No surprise that it was sort of an SDV-oriented show, at least the mobility portion of it. We had Honda and BMW emphasizing SDV architectures. We had AWS announcing partnerships with the entire West Hall of different aspects of SDV. So I want to kind of level set for a varied audience we might have watching this. What is an SDV to you? How do you define it? And I'm curious, going back a few years, has that definition sort of changed over time as the industry's grabbed onto it?
Yeah, sure. I think before you talk about kind of the end state of an SDV, you got to really talk about where are we today? What's the alternative? What's out there? And what I look at it as is what we call a distributed architecture. Okay, I'll talk in a minute about what an SDV is, but what we did in the auto industry for decades was we slowly introduced more and more software. We slowly, over the course of decades, introduced more and more control modules to the point where, if you can believe it, in modern vehicles today, there's over 100 plus, in some cases up to 150 separate modules in a vehicle running up to 150 million lines of code. So as these things kept being strung together, I'll call, if I may, they just grew in complexity and in how many branches of code and how many different modules they were using, and it's frankly become unsustainable. Right. Okay, the number of software recalls grows every year, and much of it's driven by trying to manage this very complex, very code-intensive architecture that vehicles are running on. So that's why we need to go to an SDV, a software-defined vehicle. Sure. And I kind of have 5 tick marks to make it an SDV, maybe 4, depending how you look at them. But the first thing is we got to decouple the software from the hardware. Right. Okay. So all these modules I talked about, most of them came with software on them. So the software was everywhere, right? We want to decouple the customer-critical software from the hardware and put it a layer above, right? Number 2. Then thereby that software, it defines the customer experience. So it's now decoupled, it's customer driven, and it's defining the customer experience. It's also, number 3, updatable. Okay, the product is updatable. It can live through the life cycle of the product. You can over there update fixes, features, and even if you're clever, revenue generating features to the product. All right? And then all that software and capability has to be built on an efficient electrical architecture, what's commonly called zonal or central compute, which is really, instead of all these modules can network together, like I call the bowl of spaghetti, you put a high performance central compute on the vehicle, and then you break the vehicles into zones, and you run your software that way, you build your stack that way. That takes your wiring costs down, it takes the number of modules dramatically down, and it even makes your code and your software more efficient. Right. 5th point, thanks for bearing with me, you're getting the nirvana of data collection, right? We're getting more highly leveraged data collected from the vehicle that in turn can be used to improve the customer experience. It also has benefits for the OEMs as well. Right. But those are the constituents that if you move to those, your quality will go up, your costs theoretically should go down, and you will have a sustainable product that can grow through its life.
Yeah. It's interesting, especially, it caught my attention when you're talking about this distributed architecture, going, a centralized approach. When we talk about what's happening with electric vehicles, right? And we have this, high anticipation of volume that didn't exactly come. We're still growing, but we're starting to see some delays. That's a whole nother topic, right? We've got a combination of where's the consumer at and what do they expect out of the next vehicle, where are they at with charging network and things like that. We have policy implications and what that means for maybe extending an ICE platform longer than you had originally announced for that. Now, when you talk about OTA, for example, this is one where I always used to hear, well, don't worry about it because in an electric vehicle, this is all going to be centralized. These problems with OTA, it's going to be much easier to handle. If we extend ICE out longer than we thought we would originally, could we potentially see delays in SDV platforms, which the ones that are announced typically are announced to the next generation EV platform? So what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, so the SDV work was tied to EVs for a couple of really good reasons. One is EVs by their very nature are digital powertrains and have all the great benefits that an SDV can bring. Secondly, as you mentioned, the EV growth curve looked very steep.
Yeah.
And so as you start new platforms, there's no better time to do a new electrical architecture and a software architecture than with a new vehicle platform. So those two, all that aligned, and that's why you saw them being linked. And they were linked, but I want to emphasize, we should not delay the SDV journey if you push out your EV cycle plan. All the benefits for an EV from a software-defined vehicle architecture are true as well on an ICE vehicle or a hybrid, right? So you don't want to push that. Remember when I talked about that unsustainable condition that's growing with all the branches of code? If you don't move that, even though you're driving an ICE vehicle or a hybrid vehicle, you'll fall into that rat hole. So my strong recommendation is do not delay the journey to SDV, even if you move your EV cycle plan.
Yeah. So if you're in an OEM's position and maybe you don't have a ton of clarity on exactly how long you're going to keep that program alive, you want to see how the market, how policy, go forward with SDV, apply it to that next generation vehicle, and then in theory those learnings they're going to pull forward with whenever that next EV platform is up.
Absolutely. I mean, what you want to get to is so you've got a standardized architecture across all your power plants, right? So whichever one is driving your biggest change in investment is where you want to couple your progression to SDV.
Got it.
Which is not an easy progression to make, Bob.
Sure. Well, maybe speaking, that's actually a good lead into our next topic. We've seen, if you're, casually, you've seen software-defined vehicle mentioned in the news. I'm guessing where you've seen some of those headlines is around some high-profile failures, OEMs that pushed hard. Especially those that pushed early, which is always going to be a cost of pushing early, right? It's challenging to break into. And we've seen many examples now of OEMs that have made big bets, and some of them have not worked out, or not at the pace at least they originally hoped they would. Right. So first of all, what lessons can we learn from the Mach 1, 2, 3 version of kind of pushing towards a software-defined vehicle? And then I'm really curious if we start to characterize what success looks like, a winner in SDV look like. What are the characteristics that you see working with all of these different OEMs of kind of what makes up a winner?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think the journey to SDV is one that well, let's talk about warranty first, actually.
Okay.
We study very closely the warranty data from NHTSA on software-related recalls.
Sure.
So just to set the stage, when you talk about kind of winners and losers, you're going to be in trouble because we hit a high watermark last year of over 40% in count of vehicles recalled that were software-related recalls. Now, this might mean a software update fixed a hardware-related problem, but software was involved nonetheless. So how you manage and handle software and update software is critical. And that was over 12 million vehicles.
Wow.
And so that's a huge indicator of this dynamic we're in, where you've got to make the progress to SDVs and OTA capability so that you can do these efficiently. In fact, the largest recall last year was the Tesla font issue. It was the size of the font in the cluster. Now, I don't think any of us would consider that a crisis, because I think the customer still was able to use the vehicle, nobody was stranded. But think about if 2.2 million vehicles had to come into the dealer and have the cluster removed and flashed or fixed or replaced. The cost of that is astounding, right? So the winners are going to be the people that, even when they do have a problem, they can update it quickly, efficiently, and verify the fix.
Yeah.
Now, you talked about launches. Obviously, I would rather have a launch issue than a field issue, because at least you've got launch issues contained inside the OEM.
Sure.
And really, what you've got to do is, in fact, maybe we talk for a minute about, I find it interesting that many of the startups have been actually pretty good at this. Startups, obviously Tesla's the benchmark, but there's Rivian, there's Lucid, there's VinFast. They've all been successful pretty successful at doing a SDV. Well, how is it that these small startups can do something that these huge OEMs are struggling with? Well, the answer in my mind is relatively simple. It's because they've got a very simple lineup, usually one product. They've got no OPD product, no product in the field that's going to distract them, and they've got no technical debt. They don't have legacy systems that they're trying to integrate. They've got a simple lineup, and they've got a focused team, usually a small team, by the way, relatively speaking. And if they have good leadership, then they can do it. So contrast that to some of the big OEMs that have 5,000, 6,000 dev heads and 30 plus products and all kinds of technical debt. The challenge becomes much more steep, becomes much steeper. In fact, I think the joint cooperation between VW and Scout is astounding. I mean, VW is one of the giants in the industry, at least from a revenue perspective, and the fact that with all their resources, they went to a startup like Rivian to help them in this space, and so that shows you how difficult it can be.
For sure. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I want to go back to the warranty point for a minute and recalls. So, I think there's a couple of things here. First of all, especially with the software-oriented recalls, when we look at those numbers, there's a big different flavor. The text font is a good example of them. There are some that are critical vehicle safety-oriented, right?
Yep.
There's a difference between the text font on the instrument cluster and the instrument cluster failing and turning off, right? And now we've got potentially an issue, right? So I think what's interesting too is how they're serviced, pushing out an update that maybe you're not even super aware of what happened, but you got a notification that an update happened, and in the background, oh, by the way, we changed the text issue we had. And there's still many OEMs though that you're going to the dealership, right? Even if the problem is solved over the air. So can you talk a little bit about that sort of, not only the amount of recalls, but the sort of costs and fixing them and how that's so varied depending on where the OEM's at?
Absolutely, and the fact is that the vast majority of software-related recalls are not fixed OTA. That's where the industry wants to go and needs to go.
Right.
But as you say, when you got to bring it in, and just think about, the customer with the font issue. Firstly, most of them probably didn't even know they had a font issue.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. So they woke up one morning and it was fixed. So from a customer satisfaction, but just from a cost and logistics perspective, it's huge. And as you also mentioned, there was the 4 big recalls last year. I think 2 were Tesla and 2 were Stellantis, and they had cameras and some other issues that went on. And the ability to fix things OTA, cannot be overstated. How much more efficiency that brings you from a cost perspective and a customer satisfaction perspective, and also you can also prove out the fix quite quickly as well. You can download a sub fleet of the vehicles, test them, confirm your fix did what it was meant to, didn't have any unintended consequences, and then before you blow that fix out to the broader vehicle park that's out there. Yeah. So that's a huge benefit in the industry as we move in that direction.
Yeah. So in terms of this exploding number of software-oriented or at least included recalls, where are we pointing the blame there? Is it just that there's so much more content? Is it the complex supply chain where you've got all these different softwares going into a single vehicle? Like, where would you identify the source?
Well, as you can imagine, there's no single source,
Right.
right? I mean, when we go in and help clients build better software, we kind of look at a number of pillars, right? One is your talent. Do you have the talent and skills that you need, right? The second one is your process and tools. Have you set up your software factory correctly? Are you submitting code? Is it being tested adequately? Is the burn down on the bugs? Are the bugs being identified? Are they being burned down? Thirdly, the platform, the software architecture that you're building. Are you building it on a stable architecture that can be built on without creating unique branches of software? Right. And thirdly, I think most of the OEMs have a good customer knowledge and a good customer input to the process. You have to have all of those. Now let me go back to the first one, talent. I think there's been a lot in the media about a lot of tech companies, a lot of the industrials hiring executives from tech companies and bringing them in, and that's going to solve all the problems. And sometimes they don't last, if you haven't noticed. And I don't think that's anybody's fault to point at. It's a huge cultural difference. But here's what you need to realize. We have super smart people in the automotive industry when it comes to software, super talented people. And what they particularly bring to the party is reliability, adherence to regulatory compliance, safety first solutions, and that all-important customer knowledge, among many other things. But that's a core that you can't reboot your car at 80 miles an hour, okay? There's no control, delete, none of that old stuff. So those solutions have to be solid. But what does the tech industry bring? The tech industry brings rapid digital innovation on powerful platforms that are updatable and as products that can grow and improve through time.
Right.
So if you can take the best of those two worlds, put them together, and make them work as in a harmonious team, I think you'll get the best testing, you'll get the best reliability, you get the best safety, and you get the best customer attributes that there can be. That'd be a winner. You asked me about winners.
Sure.
The people I think that do that. The second one is when we go into a lot of clients, they know what they want to do, but let's say they're setting up their software tool chain. It's not always set up exactly right. I mean, it's maybe got too many instances. And the teams aren't communicating in the right way, or the code's not being submitted in the right way, or they're not turning code fast enough. So that's comes the whole process and tools piece. And then we talked a little bit about the architectures with the high performance compute and the zonal system. So those are all the pieces you need to avoid the trouble that you're talking about. But it's very, the task is enormous. Yeah. And so we can talk more about the things the big guys need to do, but I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, no, for sure. And to go back again to another point you made up when we were talking about the warranty recall is some of the partnerships. You talked about Volkswagen and Rivian. We've seen a number of partnerships. That one is a great example because SDV is such a core of the value on Volkswagen side in particular of what they can get out of that, but through a joint venture. We also have other partnerships happening for other reasons. Honda, Nissan, Mitsubishi. We've got Honda, Sony, Mobility. Partnerships all over. I think everybody predicts that there's just going to be more tomorrow than there was today, and there's a lot today. So I think this is kind of complicated. Sometimes we can oversimplify the look there. Okay, Rivian needs some cash, Volkswagen, architecture for Scout, this makes a lot of sense. But you're also taking on all of these different platforms, especially when it's just, like, again, Nissan, Honda, Mitsubishi, for instance. How much of that is an advantage because we have scale, we have more engineering talent, we can pull together investment dollars versus the disadvantage of now we have all of these different platforms and the tech debt, just multiply it, right?
Yeah, that's right. This might be the most interesting of all our questions so far, and I've actually got some strong views about it. And I mentioned, in fact, my colleague and I were laughing the other day. And we were both in the industry, and a couple of the major OEMs wanted to collaborate on a high mount stop lamp. And they couldn't even agree the specifications for a high mount stop lamp. So if they can't agree the specifications on a high mount stop lamp, a architecture for a software defined vehicle could be tough. Yeah. But as I said, we were joking. And there are examples, very few software, but a few, of where some of the major players have collaborated. And there will be more collaboration and there will be more attempts, and I'm aware of you know, the Honda Nissan you mentioned. We talked about Rivian.
Yep.
But here's my thought in a nutshell is I think the opportunity to share is important because we the Western automotive industry, the North American, however you want to look at it, we have an existential threat from the Chinese. They are growing and they are sharing at an alarming rate, and they're fast. And you know, the politicians are talking about tariffs and all that, and okay, fine, but you can't do that forever. You've got to compete. But they've got such a cost advantage, and for a lot of reasons. So what of that in my mind is, could you imagine our industry collaborating on the non-customer relevant piece of the stack? Okay, on the silicone, there's some services and functions that are provided pretty much the same for everybody, right? Before you get to that abstracted layer, APIs, and then you're into all this exciting customer stuff. Well, everybody keep doing all your exciting customer stuff, but why not in that core system, that core software, and maybe even hardware in your zonal system? Why can't that be an industry standard? Improves quality, reduces cost, and it helps manage, allocate your talent. So instead of allocating your talent to all these functions that customers don't notice, why don't you want to allocate your talent to high-res audio or further ADAS improvements or who knows what, right? All that fun stuff. So, but getting the industry to do that is this has been talked about in some circles for a while, but to my knowledge, it hasn't progressed at all. Yeah. And how could we make that happen? And maybe people like you can get everybody thinking that way. And if we don't do it, the Chinese are doing it. Yeah. So if we don't come up with a way to get more efficiency, if you could, electrical content in a BOM is 40%? So if you could take 15% out of that 40%, that's real money to a vehicle cost.
Yeah. I would guess that this story